just quickly, the Amazon Basics rubber hex dumbbells. So they do sell on Amazon Basics. That's kind of their line. They do sell the neoprene ones, and then they got these rubber hex ones. So I'm going to cover these rubber hex ones today. These are kind of, I want to say at the lighter to mid-range poundage wise. They don't really have a 1 or 2 pound. They kind of start with 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, all the way up to around like 50 or so. So this is kind of the mid to heavier range. So, if you're starting out, you're doing something, you're probably not going to be looking for like a 50-pound dumbbell. So this is kind of like a nice mid-range to upper poundage range of a dumbbell. They are made of cast iron, even though they don't look like it. You might think, oh, they're solid rubber. Well, they're not. It's cast iron in there that's encased actually in rubber. And I've seen a lot of these in gyms over the years because I've been lifting a long time. These are actually one of the more sturdier dumbbells you'll ever find just because of this rubber. You can drop these things, unless you drop them on concrete and they start to scrape a lot. These things are very sturdy and basically last you just about forever. Another thing I do like about them is that they do have this hexagon pattern so that they won't roll off. A lot of times in the gym, maybe after you're lifting weights, sometimes you have to release it kind of quick and the thing goes rolling off. These won't do that because of their shape. So that's really smart design. They do have a non-slip grip. That's one thing that I probably don't care for personally is that this is steel here, and well, whatever, I don't really know exactly what it's made of. Maybe it's aluminum, but when you grip it, it can be kind of uncomfortable because these things are kind of, I'll say, a little bit sharp. So if you're really using a lot of weight and you're gripping it tightly, it does kind of hurt your hand a little bit. So that's the only negative thing really that I don't like about these. If that's a big deal, just stick to the neoprene ones that they sell. So yeah, the other thing too that's kind of cool is that they kind of stamp the poundage here. A lot of dumbbells, they'll just print it on there, and then after a while, the print wears off, and then you don't know how big the dumbbell is. This, they've actually stamped it in there in the rubber, so that'll never go away. So yeah, if you're looking for a good pair, like I say, mid-range pound of dumbbells, this is a good set. Now, if you do lift weights and you have any kind of a shoulder problem, or you get lifting weights and you have a shoulder problem, I would encourage you to do at least one exercise for your rotator cuff. And I'll tell you why. Your rotator cuff is the main stabilizer of your shoulder. So really, no matter what shoulder problem you have, even if you have a torn rotator cuff or some impingement syndrome or whatever, be sure you do at least one exercise for your rotator cuff. The rotator cuff is a very shallow ball and socket joint. And so it really depends heavily on muscles to keep it in place. And of all the muscles that support it, it's the rotator cuff that does it. That's its main job. Now that's unlike the hip. That's kind of a shallow, that's a really deep ball and socket joint. The hip joint doesn't depend that much on muscles to keep everything where it's at, but the shoulder does. So real briefly, this is another resource you might want to consider. It says for seniors, but anybody really can use this, even high-level athletes. So if you're looking for some good rotator cuff exercises, or you have a rotator cuff tear, it's keeping you from lifting, or you're rehabilitating your shoulder, this is a good resource. This kind of starts out with some general anatomy. Has a great question and answer section here. What are the symptoms of a rotator cuff tear? Where does it tear at? Are there different kinds of tears? Here's a good one. I have a rotator cuff tear and I'm in a lot of pain. I need surgery, right? Well, not necessarily, and that's kind of a myth. But so this is a very evidence-based book, and so they answer that question by looking at studies where, let's say, you take 100 people with a torn rotator cuff, right? So the researchers measure the size of the tear, and then they run a pain scale, like a visual analog scale, to see how bad people are hurting. So you have a group of people that you know how big their tear is, and you know how bad they're hurting. Now, one would think there's a perfect correlation. Hey, the people with the bigger tears are hurting the most, but that's not what they find at all. A lot of people walk around with big tears that are hardly hurting, and there's people with small tears that is just killing them. And then there's a whole new group of people that have tears in the rotator cuff and they're asymptomatic. A lot of studies on that. So you can have a big rotator cuff tear and no pain. So that's why you don't want to necessarily go for the I'm hurting and MRI says I have a tear. I got to have surgery. Well, not really. It could be something else giving you your pain, and then you don't want to go for your rotator cuff repair. They fix the rotator cuff, but then, hey, it was really something else in the beginning that caused all your problems. What will happen if I just leave my rotator cuff tear alone? What happens over time? And here's probably the best one. How does exercise compare to surgery when it comes to treating a torn rotator cuff? So only way you can answer that scientifically is look at the randomized controlled trials. And so that's the highest form of proof in medicine that any treatment is actually effective. So here you take, say, 100 people with torn rotator cuffs, 50 you randomly assigned to surgery, the other 50 you randomly assigned to a good exercise program. And then at the end of the study, after 6 weeks, 6 months, 2 years, 5 years, there's some really good long-term follow-up studies. You see who did better, the people that had the exercise program or the people that had the surgery. So this book has actually compiled all the randomized controlled trials comparing exercise to surgery. And basically, make a long story short, you're going to end up in the same place. So anyway, to that end, they have an exercise program. There's 3 different levels. If you just need to strengthen, or if you can even hardly just move your arm, there's really something for everyone here. So anyway, just another resource for you. But yeah, if you're looking for a really sturdy pair of dumbbells, I say this is really, really the set to get. So there you go. Check it out.